Hey guys, welcome to the 11th video in this Flame game development series where we are making Ski Master, a top-down vertical scroller about skiing. In the last video, we added a simple 3-star system to the game which allows us to reward stars to the player when they complete a level. And the number of stars is based on the amount of snowmen collected by them in the level. So in this video, I'm going to introduce the concept of life for the player. Essentially, the player character will start out with a certain number of lives in each level, and on every respawn they'll lose one life. If the number of lives becomes 0, the player will be shown the game over menu. Also, the number of lives remaining will be displayed on the HUD similar to the score. And I'm thinking of adding it on the bottom left corner. But before we start that, I'd like to fix a minor issue with the wobble effect that we added to the snowman sprite on the HUD. If you look carefully, you'll notice that the sprite only rotates on one side of the sprite. But I'd like to make it rotate on both sides. In mathematical terms, I want it to rotate pi by 8 radians in positive as well as negative direction about its normal state. So to achieve that, we'll have to use the zigzag effect controller. And to make it repeat, I'll wrap it inside a repeated effect controller with repeat count as 2. Let's quickly test this in the game. And as you can see, now the sprite wobbles symmetrically on both the sides. Okay, now let's start making changes to display the player life on the HUD. First, I'll duplicate the sprite component member and rename it to player. This will display the player sprite. Next, let's rename the count text component to score to make it clear what it actually represents. Then I'll duplicate this text component as well and rename it to life. This will display the remaining number of lives with initial value as 3. Now, similar to the snowman, I'll add a required sprite parameter for player and initialize the component in the HUD constructor. Next, in the onload method, I'll add code to position the player sprite and the live text on the bottom left corner. The player sprite will be at a distance of 16 units from the left edge and 20 units from the bottom edge. And I'll place rest of the components with respect to the player component. Finally, I'll add these new components to the HUD. Now back in the onload method of gameplay class, we'll have to provide the player sprite as input to the HUD. We can easily get that from the sprite sheet using the getSpritesheet method. Let's quickly run the game and test how it looks. And yes, you can see that new components are visible on the bottom left corner. Now let's see how to update this life count on the HUD. For that, in the HUD class, I'll first create an update life count method similar to the update snow count. This will update the life text with given count and will add similar wobble and scale effect to player and life component. Next, to track the number of lives, I'll add another integer field in gameplay class called nLives. And since I want the player to start out with just 3 lives, I'll set the initial value for this as 3. Then in the reset player method of this class, before we reset the player's position, I'll reduce the n lives by 1 and will call the update life count method on the HUD with n lives as input. Next, I'll move this reset to call under an if check to make sure that we respawn the player only if n lives is greater than 0. If it is not, we can simply invoke the onGameOver callback. Now let's quickly test this in the game. Yep, as you can see, the life does reduce by 1 every time the player goes off trail and gets respawned. And once the life count reaches 0, the game over menu gets displayed. But you can see that the player still keeps going on in the background and even the life count becomes negative. Also, I think the wait time before getting respawned is quite big. Maybe we should reduce it a bit. So let's fix these things next. First, I'll go to the reset timer and reduce the duration from 1.5 to 1 second. Next, if you remember, We had added some code in the update method to gradually slow down the player when the level completes. We can use the same logic on GameOver as well. For that, I'll first add one more boolean member in this class called GameOver. Initial value for this will be false. Then back in the reset player method, before calling on GameOver, I'll set GameOver to true. Now in the update method, to make the player slow down, I'll check the value of GameOver along with level complete using an OR operator. This will reduce the time scale of the player when either of the two values becomes true. Let's save this and restart the game to see if it works. And yes, you can see that the player does slow down when the game is over. Okay, and to keep things consistent with the level complete menu, let's make the game fade out to white on game over as well. For that, I'll just copy the fader code from on trail end and add it just before calling on game over from the reset player method. Now let's check this in the game. And yes, it seems to be working perfectly fine here. So yeah, that was it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. If you did, do hit that like button, consider subscribing to show your support, and I'll see you in the next one.